On the last episode of Menace, the Ken story. Things got real crazy after Pop started smoking crack. It was one of those things that me and Kenny had to reflect back on and compare it to our memories. I was 9 when we first found the crack in Pop's sock drawer. We had spent months looking at him and Mom for crackhead signs. But 2 years later, we knew for sure that he was smoking crack. I had seen it with my own eyes, and Kenny knew that my word was as good as him having seen it himself. Yet, nothing changed. At first, he still looked and acted like Pops. And in spite of the fact that he was smoking crack, he was still selling crack to the more cracked out crackheads. But if you know anything about crack, you know that you have to be awfully strong to straddle that fence. You're gonna have to either do drugs or sell drugs. It's pretty hard to do both. And when it came down to it, I think Pops was a better doer than he was a seller. And that's how he got beat up. The first time. We were eating dinner when our front door flung open out of nowhere. In my mind, it was the police. I wouldn't have told anybody at that time, but that was a constant fear of mine. That cop show had just come out. In my mind, they were busting in on everybody. But I've come to realize something since then. We had multiple threats in our lives, but they all moved differently. They all moved differently because their motives were different. However, it was always about the element of surprise. The crackheads slither around because they didn't want to be seen. Their only purpose was to find drugs or something they could sell or exchange for drugs. They moved as quietly as possible. You just got home and your stuff was gone. The police made their presence known when they came through. Best believe they were going to announce themselves. Police, get down. They moved with authority and caused a commotion because they wanted to let you know who was in charge. They wanted people to be thrown off and fearful. The people who made their way in that night were neither of those. They were 2 well-dressed black men who wore lots of jewelry. They busted in and went straight to the point. Both men had guns. One stood in the doorway while the other walked over to the table where we were seated. Without acknowledging anyone else, the first man spoke to Pops. "You got my money, Chris?" Pops was terrified. I could see it in his face. He addressed the man. "Rob, we said Friday, right?" Without warning, Rob started beating Pops with the gun. Mom stood up and started pleading for the man to stop beating Pops. The second man, who hadn't moved the entire time, walked towards Mom and motioned for her to sit down with his gun. We all watched as Pops got beaten to a pulp. Me and Mom cried. Kenny never even stopped eating. When Rob finished beating Pops, he put his gun in his waistband and walked towards the door. The other man spoke for the first time. He said, "Happy Friday, nigga." That was on a Wednesday. 2 days later, Ma had to give Rob her whole check to keep him from killing Pops. I was 11. Kenny was 14. That happened several more times. When we were by ourselves, Kenny started calling Pops Crackhead Chris. Chapter 5. Respect. Narrated by Shandora Warren. Music by Epidemic Sound. I mentally referenced several points in my life where things changed. They were the times where life was altered to the point where it couldn't go back. My mind always remembers each individual detail surrounding those events. For example, I remember all the details surrounding the Adrian situation. The same is true for the first time Pops didn't come home, the first time I saw Pops fight Ma, the first time I saw Pops smoke crack, and the first time I saw Rob beat Pops up, and when Kenny came home with that car. I think the reason why those events stood out so much was because they were life-altering. I probably wouldn't have understood it in that way if it wasn't for the conversations that I had with Kenny. I remember we were down at the path smoking weed one day. It was a Wednesday. Kenny decided to have a conversation with me about respect. He said, "Ken, you want to know why I do what I do? Because what you do matters. You just have to decide who is worth mattering to. There are a lot of people out here who think I ain't worth nothing, and I might not be to them, but I matter to the ones I want to matter to. They respect me, and that's enough for me." At the time, I laughed and told Kenny that he was high, but I've thought back to that conversation so many times and realized something. All of those situations stood out to me because I realized that they changed the dynamics of respect. When Pops got Celia pregnant, it was because he didn't respect Ma enough to be faithful to her. He didn't even respect her enough to care that she was hurting. As a result, I lost some respect for him. When Pops didn't come home with the car, It was because he didn't respect Ma enough to care whether she lost her job or not. He was selfish enough to do what he wanted at whatever cost. As a result, I lost some respect for him. When Pops put his hands on Ma, it was because he didn't respect her enough to care about her well-being. As a result, I lost some respect for him. When I saw Pop smoking crack, I realized that he didn't care. He obviously didn't have to smoke crack, but if he did, he could have done it anywhere. He did it right there in the house. And knowing that we all lived there, he continued to. All the stuff that we got exposed to was the result of him getting into that lifestyle. As a result, I lost some respect for him. And then there was a situation with Rob. I had watched Pops attempt to intimidate Kenny on the low for years. I'd watch him push the crackheads around, but nothing could have prepared me for how Rob punked him. Rob treated Pops like a punching bag, and he took it. And when Kenny got old enough to get some get back, he made sure to rub it in Pops' face. Seeing the way it all played out made me lose some respect for Pops. But what happened next pushed that to a whole new level. I was 15 and Kenny was 18. The timing of it all was already messed up because there was a lot going on. Grandma passed away and left us her house. We moved out of our apartment and into Grandma's house, which was about 20 minutes away. It was a little further in the country, so I had to switch schools and everything. I was in the 10th grade. I was the new kid, handsome, well-dressed, I smelled good, and I knew how to talk to the ladies. Kenny made sure of that. I made the best of the situation. Well, I took advantage of it. I got popular real quick. And even though we were in a different school district, Kenny's reputation preceded him. By default, mine did too. The girls in that school were on me like honey, but life was crumbling at home. Ma was basically depressed about Grandma's passing and decided to take some time off work. She was on the edge about everything, so Pops wasn't getting the passes anymore. They were fighting more than ever. So because they were fighting more, Pops and Kenny were going at it more too. But the dynamics had changed. Kenny wasn't a little boy anymore. He was about 6'3" and over 200 pounds. But more importantly, he ain't mind putting his hands on Pops. Like, they were actually fist fighting by that point. Things came to a head on a random Wednesday. I had skipped school and me and Kenny spent the day just hanging out. We went to the mall and then we went out to the dirt path to smoke. When we got home, Pops was high. Like, high. We could tell. It's like Kenny just connected the dots. He yelled out, "Hey, Pops, what you do? What you do, man?" Kenny ran outside. When he got back, he was hot. This is the thing. Kenny never kept drugs in the house, but he did keep money in random places. One of his spots was a shoebox that he kept in an old beat-up shed outside. Nobody ever went in there because it wasn't really safe. Kenny told me about the stash just in case I needed something, but he knew I wouldn't have gone in it without telling him. So when he went out to check it and saw that all the money was gone, he knew that it had to have been Pops. The worst part about it was the fact that the money was a means to an end. Ma had been out of work since Grandma died, and she was basically living off of the insurance payout and what Kenny was giving to her. There were a couple of things that needed to be done to the house, so Kenny wanted to surprise her and get them done. But just like every other time, Pops had proven that he didn't care about anybody other than himself. He didn't just dip into the money. He took it all. It was a little over $3,000. Kenny went off. He called Pops every name in the book and told him that he was gonna pay him the money back. Honestly, I think Pops was scared of Kenny, but he played it off under that whole, "I'm the parent and you're not gonna disrespect me under my roof" thing. He told Kenny to get out of the house, and that was the straw that broke the camel's back. Kenny never really had a filter, but if he did, it completely broke at that point. Kenny yelled out, "Nigga, this ain't your roof. This my granddaddy's roof. My granddaddy worked hard for this roof and everything under it. My granddaddy made a way for this roof, this house, my grandma, my mama, me, my brother, and you. Now some work needs to be done to the roof, and I'm trying to make a way. You done messed that up. You a real nigga for that, Pops. Ain't but 3 people that could put me out of this house, and 2 of them dead. Ma, do I gotta leave?" Ma was just over it. She said, "Y'all cut this mess out." and walked back into her bedroom. Now this is the thing. Kenny knew he didn't have to leave. Pops couldn't make him leave, and Mom wouldn't make him leave. I think he was just over Pops at that point. Kenny looks at Pops right in the face and said, "Forget you, nigga," and I mean that. For the first time, I was in the middle of it. I told Pops that it was Kenny's house too, and he didn't have to leave. Kenny said, "Nah, I'm out." Kenny knew he'd never be homeless. There was always some girl, or Rob always had some spot. He was 18, and that was just the end of the line for him. Kenny threw all of his stuff into trash bags and packed it into his 1991 Honda, and I helped him. And that goes back to the respect thing. I lost so much respect for Pops with that whole situation. It was bad enough that he wasn't helping Mom, but he stole from the only person who was. And when he got caught up in what he obviously did, he pulled the parent card, like he didn't just steal from his son. I was angry after Kenny left. The crazy thing is, I didn't hide it. And even though I made sure that Pops knew I blamed him, he never treated me like he treated Kenny. Not once. And I was disrespectful too. That just made me madder. Kenny didn't go away, of course. He still came to the house to give my money, and he still came to get me on Wednesdays. But it was different. He wasn't there, and I knew he wouldn't be there. Kenny always acted like a visitor when he came over, and that made me mad. True to his word, he was really like, forget Pops. He didn't speak to Pops when he came over to the house, and if I ever mentioned anything related to him, Kenny would literally say, "Forget that nigga." Or sometimes, he'd just call him Crackhead Chris. There was really no coming back from it. Thank you so much for listening. Please follow me on Facebook and Instagram. I'd love to hear from you. If you'd like to purchase books by Shandora Warren, they're all available on Amazon in ebook, paperback, and some in hardback formats. Please like and follow this podcast, and feel free to share it with your friends, family, and frenemies, because all relationships matter, even the toxic ones. Thanks so much for helping me to create the world that I want to see. Oh yeah, you're welcome. Shine, little girl.